Don't waste your energy trying to prove to racists that you're human. Turn that page. The only thing you need to do is focus your energy on being you fully. We saw that in Hollywood, they have raised £100 million for, essentially pro-Israeli propaganda films about October the 7th that Israel has just announced. And do you want to wake up every day and watch pain and suffering? Or do you need to obviously be aware of pain and suffering, but maybe connect with people in a way that makes you understand that they're not just walking victims? As a Palestinian, you don't feel like you have to tell a story that is about educating people about Palestine. You need to just tell the story you want to tell.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of Pulse 48, the Palestinian podcast, where we talk about everything that have with Palestine to do, because Palestine is so much more than a war zone. Today, we are honored to have Myriam Francois, correct?
Yes.
Correct
Yes, beautiful. Thank
as
you.
our guest. Myriam is an Irish-French filmmaker, journalist, and passionate voice for justice and human rights. We are excited to discuss your work and insights on Palestine specific. How come you as Irish, French, journalist, filmmaker, and you have been talking so much about specific Palestine?
Well, there's many ways I could answer that question, but I would start by saying that when I was 19, I had the opportunity to move to Palestine for a year, and I lived in Jerusalem, and I was working in the West Bank. And, I think anyone who lives under the occupation, it never leaves you. The experience of living under the occupation is something that has stayed with me. And the apartheid system that I was a witness to, that I experienced, is something that is reminiscent of some of the darkest chapters of colonial history. And so, as someone who is passionate, as you say, about justice and equality and human rights, and maybe even more broadly, the question of decolonization, which has been a big part of my academic studies. For me, Palestine is one of the litmus tests of the international community when it comes to our commitment to countries having true and meaningful independence and truly decolonizing the world.
And you chose the language of journalism, or basically also filmmaking.
Yes.
How is the storytelling? How can we really talk about Palestine through storytelling? We know Hollywood is talking a specific agenda. It's not just movies that we're watching. They are letting us believe in a specific story that they are telling us.
Yeah.
How do you use that to talk about Palestine
Yeah.
through storytelling?
I mean, all conflicts have narratives to justify the different perspectives involved. And I think, the Israelis have had a lot of money pumped into their narrative because they've understood that the real war is a war over people's hearts and minds, right? It's convincing people that they're siding with the right side of history, with people that look like them and feel like them and sound like them. And I think that we are, as a community of filmmakers who are committed to not supporting apartheid and ethnic cleansing and now genocide, we're a little behind. Not as much money has been invested. There are some fantastic Palestinian films, but they are not receiving necessarily as much support as they should do. I think that tide is changing slightly, but really, years ago, I gave up on the idea of trying to convince people through political arguments. My view is that you can debate with someone for hours, and at the end of it, they may not even have changed their mind by 1 centimeter. But really, if you show someone a human story, even of someone that they really thought that they disliked, or something that they already thought they had very strong opinions of, if you can change something in their heart with how they respond to that person or that issue, that for me is much more transformative and long-term change. And so, that's where my personal interest lies today. I'm not particularly interested in arguing with people over history or geography, or I mean, I can do it. I have a PhD in Middle East politics. I can do that, but I don't see the point in arguing. I see much more value in helping people shift their hearts, not just on this issue, but on any issues where we allow the sorts of hatred and prejudice to become so deeply ingrained that it will facilitate the kinds of evil that we have seen over the last not just 15 months, but 76 years.
It's a long journey. I
Liberation
want
movements are long, usually, yes.
exactly. I wanted to ask something, but you have already answered a bit about it. I wanted to ask about the challenging in storytelling,
Yeah,
and specific when we talk about Palestine, because
yeah,
not everyone, I guess, not everyone understand the impact they do, or how important it is to support these kind of projects,
yeah,
short films or long films or whatever, that is talking about Palestine, because people receive the messages in different ways.
yeah,
Some people would need it visual by
mm,
drama, for example.
yeah.
What's the hardest challenge you got, or you have? Yeah, what's the hardest challenge that you had uh, when it's movies, short films, or whatever about Palestine, except the economical support?
Yeah, so I mean, I obviously mentioned the issue of funding film, which is
Mm.
always complicated, but is particularly complicated for Palestinian films.
Is it that
Um,
they are afraid? Sorry, is it that they are afraid they don't want to talk about politics, or because it's a sensitive subject, or what's the main
uh,
reason that you receive?
Well, often in our industry, you don't necessarily get an explanation, you just don't get the money.
Mm.
So I think in many cases, it's probably deemed to be too sensitive or too controversial, and there's a recognition that there's going to be a massive amount of pushback, which there always is with Palestinian films. But I think more broadly, we have an issue with strategy in that sense. Typically, uh, Palestinian adjacent communities have been particularly good at fundraising for what I would call humanitarian needs. So, hospitals, rebuilding schools, all of these things are important. But to me, if the main focus of our energies as a movement is simply on rebuilding the destruction that's caused in every cycle, every 2, 3 years, they bomb Gaza, you have to rebuild everything, then we essentially on a rat wheel, just going round in circles. And I think that the only way to get off the wheel is to stop engaging on their terms. And you engage on your own terms in art. In art, you speak from within your perspective and you share an outlook that isn't defined by the oppressor. And that's where, for me, the real glimmer of hope lies, in that there is something in the purity of a love story, of, a friendship, of loss, that transcends the divisions that are created through politics, and that we have generally failed to recognize the power of that. I think partly because politics is dominated by men. And so there's an emphasis on what I would call a more masculine approach, which is either the debating or the warring, those two options. But the notion of affecting change through changing hearts, I think, which is, to me, I see that almost as a more feminine approach, which isn't to be confused with an approach that only women can engage with, but it's an approach that is more about taking people by the hand and saying, let me just take you a little bit around my world. Let me just show you a little bit around what it looks around my ends, and see how you feel when you come out of it. To me, that's a strategy that is underfunded, under-recognized, and yet, we saw that in Hollywood they have raised 100 million pounds for, essentially pro-Israeli propaganda films about October the 7th. That Israel has just announced 150 million additional dollars to go towards propaganda. Clearly they understand the value of the arts and filmmaking and storytelling, and we are still, just always fundraising for purely humanitarian needs, which is one part of the struggle, but to my mind, cannot be the only avenue.
That's a struggle that many filmmakers or journalists or even people like us that do a podcast, that they find it's hard to find people who would like to found these projects, because it costs to do this kind of projects.
Yes.
And it affects a lot of people, because not everyone would like to listen to the news.
Yes. Well, in fact,
don't
less and less young people do listen to the news.
Exactly. Maybe a little bit on the social media, but still they don't want really to listen to the full news.
No.
So what's really happening through the news. But when you watch a short film, the storytelling, you receive it in a different way.
Of course.
And it's a huge, important part for the people to listen to.
Yeah.
But still, I don't think, or do you think we have reached a level that we can produce high-level films to share our messages that we really want? Because as you said, Hollywood just founded how many millions?
So there's $100 million film fund created after October the 7th for stories about that, of which I believe one of them is to be directed by Spielberg. And the other is $150 million that Israel has specifically allocated towards, essentially propaganda, improving the image of Israel in public opinion.
How much for the pro-Palestine movies?
It's a good question. I'm not aware of any fund.
I think this can be a message to the people, to everyone who's listening and seeing this episode. I think
Absolutely.
Don't underestimate the support for this kind of project.
Absolutely not. But also think about what's happened over the last 15 months. How much of the shift has happened from artists? Genuinely. I'm talking about singing songs. I'm talking about actors speaking out. I'm talking about people who are part of the artistic world being prepared to stand up and be counted. And because we live in a culture that's sort of so geared around content creation, these are the people that people are turning to for advice, guidance, understanding of the issue. We just have much more limited means currently. And to me, unjustifiably, because we have wealth in our community.
And we have seen in Gaza for the last 2 years, content creators, they do music videos. They do different kind of videos to talk out to the people, because they know that is what's talking to the people. That is what can touch your heart.
Well, here's the question. If you're a young person, do you want to, or an older person, do you want to wake up every day and watch pain and suffering? Or do you need to obviously be aware of pain and suffering, but maybe connect with people in a way that makes you understand that they're not just walking victims, that they're people, that they're, artists like you, that they have hopes and dreams, that they have aspirations, that they have talents that you didn't even know of. I was recently judging a film festival submission of young Palestinian filmmakers in Gaza right now. In Gaza right now, they were making films, 3-minute films, 5-minute films. And the film that, that touched me the most was not one, that was repeating the images that we see on social media, because we know what is happening. It was the stories of people's lives, like the intimacy of their stories, the beauty of their relationships, the challenges that they'd overcome, partly due to the conflict. But, it was so much more personal than what the news can offer. The news will only get you so far, in my opinion.
You mentioned that people in Gaza is doing at the moment 3 minutes short films.
Yeah.
From the equipment that they have, maybe zero budget.
Yeah.
So I think this stop a lot of people, young people in Europe, that want to be a filmmaker They said, no, I don't have the economy to do it.
Yeah.
What do you tell them? Because I know, or I have heard people, and I am also one of these people who always say this:
Yeah.
your phone is your weapon. It can be misunderstanding,
Yes.
but what do I mean? Your weapon is your strong tool that you can do many things
Of
with.
course. And the phones are getting better and better, and the cameras on them are getting better and better. And even, I mean, I have an old phone and you can shoot in 4K on my old phone. So, yes, to some extent, I would say that we have to be realistic about the quality of output that you can achieve with little to no budget. Can you create content? Absolutely. Should we be expecting artists and filmmakers to be producing content that takes months, even years? My last film took me 3.5 years to make. Yeah, without budget. To me, the answer to that is no. If you really value the content that people are making, if you recognize the importance of the arts as part of the struggle, think of this movement without the liberation songs that we have. Think about this movement without the artists that have created the murals or the short films or the paintings. What you can't have a movement without the artists. It's a huge part of what um really helps to foster the soul of the movement, the energy of the movement. And there's not enough recognition of that, in my view, and not enough funds allocated to the people speaking that language,
Mm.
that cultural language.
But my point was actually more: would this stop these people, or should they just start working with what they have, and then hopefully later on
Yeah.
they will have more chances to do better quality
Well,
films?
I would always say start with what you have,
Mm.
of course. Um, Having said that, it's it's a big ask for people to work without pay.
Mm. You can do a lot by yourself, but still you can't do it in the best way.
Yes, and look, if you're working, I don't know, 12 hours a day, you know, stacking shelves to make money. I mean, how much energy do you have when you get home to put into your art? We also have to recognize that these things are connected to wider structures of the way in which capitalism places value in certain places and takes away value from certain places. And I would always urge people to consider why it is that capitalism removes funding from certain spaces, creative spaces. Creative spaces are where we can imagine alternative realities, alternative worlds. It's spaces where we can play with reality in order to foster the potential tomorrow that looks different to today. Once you take away the funding from the artists, you remove the dreamers. You remove the people who show us through their art, through their visions, a reality that can exist before it does. And that's why the funding gets cut. That's the real reason that artists don't get funded, because they're the people that show us another way. And some people don't want there to be another way.
Mm. Let's talk about results. Do you know that you have made any short film or news report or anything with the media that have changed someone's view from being pro-Zionist to pro-Palestine or anything similar there?
So I haven't yet made a Palestinian film for many reasons, although I'm currently helping produce a film, a Palestinian film. It's actually a horror film that was written and is going to be directed by Rola Selbek, who is a Palestinian filmmaker from LA. And the thinking is that we are using the medium of horror as a vehicle to tell the Palestinian story, because ultimately we work in entertainment. Our job is to entertain people. And through entertainment, you can also educate. If you think of a film like Get Out by Jordan Peele, you have a film that really is a kind of searing critique of white supremacy in America. But Jordan doesn't sit you down and like, this is what white supremacy is. This is what white people do. He doesn't do that. He takes you on an emotional story about a couple, a mixed couple, and the black boyfriend has to go and meet the white family, and then all these events unfold. And through these events, you come to understand, you know, the symbolic and real world manifestations of white supremacy. That to me is real education. It's education through play, it's education through the heart. And I think that's probably to me where I would say we are missing a considerable amount of content that is willing to play, if you like, a little bit more, that is willing to use mediums that seem unlikely, a horror film to tell a story that will, in the end, allow audiences to recognize, you know, universal truths, including those concerning the Palestinians.
Mm-hmm. It's just dramatic how you have to do it by horror to tell a story to reach the people, because you know people understand different languages. With languages, I don't mean Swedish, Arabic, or English.
Of
No,
course, mediums.
exactly.
Yes.
Uh,
So it's a good point.
mm,
And I have watched many what I would call straight narrative Palestinian films in my time. And I'm somebody who's very interested in the Palestinian issue. I think you have to be realistic about the content you're creating. You can make straight narrative content about the Palestinian story, and it can be a beautiful, epic film. But ultimately, and I forgive me for being blunt, but who cares? Who cares? Like, we're in an industry where you're competing for eyeballs with X-Men, Avatar 3. Okay. So if you want people to watch your film, what are you bringing to the table that is going to drag me away from these fantasy alternative realities or whatever else I might be engaging in, my phone, YouTube? You have to give us something a little bit different. You have to give us something a little bit quirky. You have to bring us into a world that we want to spend time in. And so I'm always cautious of what I call righteous filmmaking. I don't believe in righteous filmmaking. We're entertainers. Our job is to take people on a journey of the heart, a journey of emotions. But, you know, first and foremost, we have to get people watching the films. You don't do that by saying, you must learn about this, you know.
no youngsters gonna just open a history book to read about the history. No, they want something catchy for them
Exactly.
to start to read or watch the movie, basically.
Yes,
So you need to
exactly.
talk, like we said, correct language that they understand, that they
That's
are
right.
interested of.
That's it. And
We
some parties have been exceptionally good at funding the YouTubers, the influencers, the people who are doing exactly that, articulating the perspective from a POV that is of interest and relatable to their particular audience. We have been far less proactive, in my view, in identifying those people and ensuring that they are given the means to be able to do that work. You know, I'd love to see some influencers head over to the West Bank. I'd love to see kind of people who to do, you know, makeup tutorials you know, in the occupied territories. You know, that you got to remember there's many different routes to accessing the range of audiences that we need to bring with us on this liberation journey.
you reach different audience in a different way, like you said. You can
Absolutely.
yeah. Last question. We don't want the youngsters to lose hope.
Yes.
It's not easy industry,
Yeah.
but it's an important, very important industry, because
Yes.
everyone is watching it.
Yeah.
What's your advice you can give to these youngsters that want to be filmmakers, journalists, and want to work at the same time or use their work for support of Palestine? Because that's the main subject today.
Yeah.
How can they use it?
I almost want to answer this differently for two types of people. If you're a Palestinian and you are a young Palestinian and you want to get into film, of course, it's the same advice as I would give to anyone else. Start with what you have. You're going to have to, you know, make a ton of mistakes. And yes, at that stage, using your iPhone and a mic that you bought off, you know, whatever website, ethical website you can find is fine. But realistically, I would hope that as a Palestinian, you don't feel like you have to tell a story that is about educating people about Palestine. You need to just tell the story you want to tell because you're Palestinian. Like, you are Palestine. Your story is Palestine. Whatever way you swing it, it's going to be a Palestinian story. And we need to see the whole range of them. I want to see, like, the Palestinian kite runner, the Palestinian Hulk, the Palestinian doctors in the ER. Like, we just need the whole range. And in making that content, you don't need to be thinking, how do I fight the occupation? Like, you just need to be. Just be who you are. Just allow your culture to flow through the content that you make. For Palestinian adjacent, meaning supporters of the Palestinian movement, I think that the question is a little bit different. I think that you have to be supporting Palestinian filmmakers in their content, but without imposing on them the limitations of their identity as being somehow just a Palestinian, as if their political identity is the only facet of who they are. Allow them to be cooks and, singers and, sports people. Allow us to see the diversity of Palestinian identity and support that journey and tell stories that incorporate the Palestinian perspective. If you notice, Hollywood's been very good at normalizing the presence of certain identities in film. They become, the funny comedian, the brother-in-law, the quirky guy at the office, whatever it may be. Palestinians need to become just normalized in our day-to-day. And I think far more powerful than constantly trying to push Palestinians to bear the entire responsibility for telling their story constantly is to support them to just be. Just be. That Toni Morrison says that racism is one of the facets of racism is that it has you constantly trying to dig up your history to prove that you're human, and you constantly having to dig this up and to prove this, and you don't have to do that. You already know you are fully human.
You don't
The
need to
only
explain
thing,
all this to the people because
don't expend that energy. Don't waste your energy trying to prove to racists that you're human. Turn that page. The only thing you need to do is focus your energy on being you fully. And in that, you will shine. And that's what I want to see more of, inshallah, on screen. I want to
Hopefully.
see more Palestinians shining in the multiplicity of who they are, whether it's behind the camera or in front of the camera.
we hope we see that day coming very soon, and
We
we see
are.
people in Gaza that they can produce films about how happy they are in Gaza
Yes.
and not how the situation is today.
Yes. Well, those films will come after the ceasefire, but in the meantime, there are some incredible films coming out of Gaza. My friend Youssef Hamash, who is a BAFTA and Emmy award-winning filmmaker from Gaza, he came out in April last year. He has a couple of films coming out for the BBC, feature films about life in Gaza. And Youssef does not allow anyone to define Palestinians from Gaza or elsewhere as just victims. So watch out for his films.
We'll do so. Thank you very much. It was an honor to talk with you today and
Thank
have
you
you
for
here as
having
our
me.
guest. And we will continue our journey, all of us.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's a long haul.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.